My name is James Walker. I'm president of Velocity Studios. We are a multi-various media production company in Los Angeles, everything from film, TV to one of my passions, which is audio-forward storytelling, including podcasts. And I am really thrilled to introduce a colleague, a friend, a mentor of mine in the audio space, Charlie Hewitt, who is president of Mirror Studios based in Boise, Idaho, what I consider on the forefront and the bleeding edge of immersive audio applications in podcasting. Charlie, say hi.
Hey, gang.
We Today's series, or today's webinar, is one of four. It's the first in our four-part series. And it's really a basic introduction into the concepts of immersive audio. And we're just going to be touching on what is it and whether you should be including it in your podcast production. Many of you may have some more advanced or specific questions in the applications of immersive audio. We'll try to answer those appropriately today, but some of those may be better positioned for our future episodes. And so we'll touch on them and ask you to join us here in the coming months as we dig into the more expert applications of immersive audio in various forms of podcast storytelling. So with that, I'm going to bring up a slide presentation we're going to share with you today. And let's see if I get this to work. Boom. Close this. Okay. Charlie, do you see my screen? Is it full screen or is it?
It's not full screen, but
not full screen yet. There we go. Okay.
That'll work. Yeah.
All right. That will work. Okay. So if there's a bar on the left, just ignore that. We'll stay with the center slides, but let's start it off. Immersive audio. It's kind of a broad term, but that comes if you break it down, it starts with spatial audio. So Charlie, take us through what is spatial and immersive audio?
Well, tomato, right? It's there's varying discussions about there's those two terms get loosely back and forth. The kind of the definition of spatial refers to three-dimensionality. And by definition, immersive refers to the sensory experience of the user. So by definition, one is technology-centric and the other is user-centric. At the end of the day, from my perspective, and I presume a lot of you folks, we're storytellers. And so it weighs less on me as to what you want to call it and more about how does it feel and how does it sound. Is it right for the story? So that's I know that's kind of a little vague, but for me, whether it's spatial or immersive, at the end of the day, it's how does the environment that we've created while telling this story sound and feel? And at the end, it's all about the storytelling.
So to sum that up, spatial audio primarily focuses on spatial localization of sound in a three-dimensional space, where immersive audio extends this concept by creating a more captivating auditory experience through additional elements like object-based audio, for example, used by Dolby Atmos. While spatial audio is a component of immersive audio, not all spatial audio experiences are necessarily considered fully immersive. And we'll dig further into that differentiating reasons here in a second. So following up again on Charlie's intro, spatial also refers to the perception of sound in three-dimensional space. It aims to replicate the way humans hear sound in the real world by creating a sense of direction, distance, and elevation in each sound source. Spatial audio is achieved through techniques like binaural recording, multi-channel audio systems, and plugins that use reverb and phase shifting to create a simulated 3D sound. These methods allow us to reproduce the spatial characteristics of sound, making them seem as if the sound is coming from specific directions. Case in point, I'm wearing Apple AirPods Pros. So the Apple AirPod Pros have a algorithm built into them. So if you're listening to spatial audio from an Apple iPhone or Apple iPad or another Apple device like my MacBook Pro, it translates the direction that I'm facing with the AirPod Pros to how it will adjust the reverb and the bouncing of sound in my ear to mimic a three-dimensional space. Spatial audio doesn't specify a fixed channel configuration like surround sound or 5.1, and we'll explain that in a little bit. It can be implemented using various channel layouts, including stereo, surround sound, or binaural mix, such as these headphones. And here's an example. So Charlie, do you want to explain what we're seeing here?
Well, just as a short history lesson, back in the day, it was mono, and then we moved to stereo, and it doubled the size of our, or more than doubled the size of our imagery for mixing sound music at the time that's when I first started. And then when we moved to surround, front, center, the 5 channels around and 1 on the floor, which is 5.1, and then moved to 7.1 and 9.2 and yada yada. So it's all based on the horizontal plane, based at kind of our ear level. And then Dolby, in recent years, with the addition of Dolby Atmos, brought some speakers and channels in the overheads. So we actually physically have the ability to bring sound in over our heads, and then by design also place that where in that sphere behind us and over our heads and in front and behind us. So now we actually have the ability to mix in a full 3-dimensional space, and that's where that spatial or immersive audio comes in.
Yeah. So immersive audio is a more broader concept that encompasses spatial audio, but adds additional elements. Immersive audio seeks to create a fully engrossing auditory experience that goes beyond the traditional stereo or surround sound setups. We go back here, traditional surround sound is just around your ear. Here's another slide to kind of show you. Traditional surround sound would just be around your ear. Spatial audio uses the algorithmic formulas, such as like what Apple does, to create and mimic a 3-dimensional space. But immersive takes us even higher. It creates a more engrossed, immersive experience. And we'll explain why, as a podcaster, this may be applicable to your storytelling. So following up on this, immersive audio involves elements like what Charlie explained, the object-based audio of Dolby Atmos, which allows the surround sources to be treated as independent objects in a 3D space. And we're going to give you an illustration here in a minute so you can see that. Dolby Atmos is a specific audio technology that utilizes object-based audio and a specific speaker configuration to deliver a highly immersive audio experience. Dolby Atmos is one implementation of spatial audio, but spatial audio is a broader term that includes other methods of technologies as well. Now, on the Dolby Atmos topic, here is an example of a picture of a workstation, of a computer screen, where you can create the sound and move it around. Now, most podcasters are never going to get this technical. You're going to give it to your sound mixer, your sound designer, who's going to work on this type of application of the sound. But as a podcaster and your storytelling, to create an immersive experience, when an audience closes their eyes and they're able to visualize through their imagination the world they're in, you're able to transform them there. And one thing I'll tell people, especially in the audio dramas I produce, what I love about audio drama podcasts is that an audience will build a visual effects world larger than I can ever put on a movie screen. Now, that may not be your goal as a podcaster. Maybe you're doing a true crime podcast, or maybe you're doing a interview style podcast or a travel log podcast. So the applications of the immersive sound design can be different depending on the storytelling you're trying to accomplish. The immersive sound applications really should enhance a story and not distract from it. And we'll get into more of those in future episodes when we talk about crafting stories for immersive audio, so you can see the applications for different styles of podcasting. But hopefully this will give you a better understanding of the techniques and the definitions or the explanations of what is spatial and immersive audio. So I kind of jump. Go ahead, Charlie.
I'm going to ask you to go back one screen there, James. So the this little dots, the yellow and orange
Yeah.
dots you see on the stage there, that's one of the beauties of Dolby Atmos mixing, and it's object based. So in a spatial mixing scenario, you might use a reverb or something like that to have a voice talking and it sounds like you're in an airplane terminal or something, at the airport or something like that, or you're in a bar or scene or something like that, where there's an ambience going on around you. And in this particular scenario, they're actually object based, which means one of those pieces you can actually put right here, or I can put it right here, I can put it right over my head, or I can put it right behind me. And as that gets in, the secret sauce that Dolby brings to this is when they mix this into a binaural, and they down mix this into a binaural presentation, which you don't have to have a big stage to mix this. We have the good fortune to be able to do it on a stage, but Dolby has offered with this and Avid now, you can actually monitor this in binaural. So you can actually monitor this in headphones and have that spatial and that immersive experience while you're mixing. And so that's the kind of the difference between object-based and spatial-based, which is just panning-based. You can actually take an individual object and place it exactly where you want it, as opposed to it just being in the room. It's specifically in a particular space. Hope that.
Yeah, thank you very much for Charlie. And we'll explain here in a second what binaural is for some of you who are newer to podcasting. So let's go back to this question. We just gave you kind of a quick little masterclass in explaining what is the difference between spatial and immersive audio. But why use immersive audio in podcasts? Why should I, if I'm starting out as a podcaster, or I've been doing really well with a fan base and I have a listenership each week, why would I want to apply immersive audio in podcasting? My simplest suggestion or encouragement is because quality matters. And in a very crowded marketplace, to differentiate your content, you have to differentiate the experience. Now, maybe you have a very specific voice. Maybe there's a specific topic. You're an expert on a specific topic, or maybe you have a specific fan following, and that's great. But to elevate that content, to take it to the next level, to continue to be on the leading edge of what your listeners are experiencing compared to all the other entertainment they're being given, that they are being inundated with, and that you're fighting to continue to have their attention with, I believe immersive audio is the differentiating factor in the quality of podcasts out there that really rise to the top. So that's kind of my pitch of why you should consider immersive audio for podcasts. And then we can talk about how to apply that appropriately to the type of podcast you're producing. So using immersive audio can enhance the overall experience of a podcast. By placing sound in a three-dimensional space, podcasters can draw listeners into the content and make it feel as if they are experiencing what is happening. Listeners may feel as though they are in the same physical space as the podcast events. With the podcasting landscape becoming increasingly competitive, using immersive audio can help a podcast stand out from the crowd. As more platforms adopt these technologies, podcasts produced with immersive audio stand a better chance of being featured and becoming more discoverable due to the added production value. So let's explain some of these terms that Charlie brought up. Binaural. Charlie, why don't you explain what binaural is?
Well, I don't think that I would actually know what the specific definition, but a binaural mix is we take the way we utilize binaural here at the facility is we'll be on the stage, we'll mix multiple channels all throughout the room, and once we'll put on headphones to listen to that same mix, and the algorithms that are created, which is kind of the secret sauce of Dolby, and they will take the algorithms and bring it down so you can experience that same mix within a 2-channel environment. So it's left and right, earbuds, speaker, headphones, and when you have those on, you're experiencing that same movement of objects and movement of sound throughout the environment. It's called binaural. So that's the binaural mix. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I've written here in this slide, it literally means using both ears, and it mimics like Charlie said, the differences in how sound reaches your ear. So you may not consciously be aware, but sound hits your ear at different times and at different frequencies, and that is how your brain is able to deconstruct where objects are in a room and such forth. So binaural is just mimicking how you would hear things naturally in the world the best we can using headphones. Ambisonics. Charlie, you want to take a stab at that?
Ambisonics, there's ambisonic microphones out there, which you can use a microphone array, and it's captured. So you literally put an ambisonic microphone out. Let's say you're out in outside in a field in the country at night, and you can hear the crickets, and you can hear, and it's, you know, when you're standing there with your eyes closed, you can hear things behind you, you can hear things all around. An ambisonic a microphone array will actually capture that, and then you can bring that back into the studio space. So ambisonics is designed to represent this spherical 3D space, and the ambisonic mics out there are pretty extraordinary. So
Yeah. And then Dolby Atmos, as we have explained earlier, is the ability to take specific sound elements and in a computer software program, be able to move them in a three-dimensional space around the subject's head, and then output that in a movie or TV scenario would be in a multi-channel, multi-speaker environment, but in a podcast scenario is output that in a binaural mix that will do its best to mimic a three-dimensional space. So how can podcasters use spatial and immersive audio tools? This is going to be more of an explanation of how can you apply it to different forms of podcasting. So let's talk about fictional storytelling. Podcasters producing fiction content, such as audio dramas, can use spatial audio and immersive audio for that matter to create more imaginative cinematic experience. Placing sound design, effects, and music in specific locations where 3D audio space within a 3D audio space will amplify the immersive experience and make listeners feel truly fully immersed in the narrative. And there are so many great examples of this. You could just throw a dart at the Ambi nominated audio dramas and listen to any one of those and hear really how those producers, those creators, those sound designers and mixers came together to create an narrative storytelling experience that was truly imaginative. And I said that earlier, closing your eyes and letting your imagination go. And there's where the sound is so important, because it is the cues to let your brain build these worlds, or let the audience's brain build these worlds. And it's really beautiful to listen to some of these stories and see where they went, and hear them in such an immersive experience. Charlie, do you want to add anything to that?
well, I think it's important to anybody that's heard me talk before or followed me on this, and I always come back to subtleties. For at least for me as a mixer, it's all about the subtleties. And so depending, it all depends on the program that you're producing. So if this is just a single person talking, or it's just a conversation talking between two people about spirituality or a cooking new recipes, or whatever kind of podcast you have, immersive audio may not make sense. It might, because the idea is that if we add something to the backgrounds, we add music, we add some sound effects, we add some background sounds and whatnot. If it takes you out of the story, you just defeated the purpose of what we're doing here as storytellers, as podcasters. So if all you're doing is a single voice, or just a simple conversation, then it would be you would err on the side of being incredibly discerning as to what you brought in there. Is it a little bit of music? Is it a little bit of backgrounds and things like that? And as James mentioned, with audio dramas, now you're at the other end of the spectrum, and the world explodes, because our job as a mixer for, say, a television show or a motion picture is to support what we see on the screen. So in this particular picture here, my job would be to put some background, a little bit of background wind and some birds and whatnot, and maybe a light breeze. But without that there, without a picture to look at, while we're listening to the audio drama unfold, our job is to paint that picture with sound and to bring our audience in. So imagine you're not looking at that lovely little cabin there and that lush valley, but we need to bring you there. So the words will start to paint that picture, and then our sound, the subtleties in the sound, the birds and the wind and whatnot, will slowly bring you into that environment. So I kind of went down a rabbit hole there, but at the same time, I think it's important to remember what story you're telling and how much you dive into that.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Let's talk about documentary style storytelling. And there are a lot of great doc podcasts out there. I'm a fan of many of them, especially in the true crime space. And as Charlie mentioned, subtleties. So in the nonfiction space with podcasting, I think immersive audio is a game changer. And those podcasters who have embraced it have really brought a sense of tone, a sense of emotion, a sense of experience to their episodes that others aren't. Yeah, podcasting, producing nonfiction content such as documentaries or investigative journalism can use spatial audio to create a more emotionally impactful experience. Placing interviews, ambient sounds, narrative elements in specific locations with 3D space can enhance the storytelling and make listeners feel more connected to your narrative. Charlie, anything you want to add for that for nonfiction?
No, that kind of nails it, bud. It's yeah.
And then let's talk about event coverage. So there's a lot of great podcasts out there that go on location to events. There's a couple great travel logs I follow. Well, I won't say travel logs; they're more local kind of event type of shows. So whether it is a conference, a performance, you can use immersive audio to replicate the spatial dynamics of a live experience, especially with music. This allows listeners to feel as though they are present at the event, capturing the atmosphere and excitement in a way that traditional stereo audio may not convey. One thing to note, though, when you're at live events is how you pick up your sound. So depending on your podcast, depending on your resources, you may want to consider some different bidirectional microphones so that you can go out there and get the type of sound that you can then use. So you may have an interview mic, small bidirectional mic, so you can pick up different sound elements that you can play with when you're ready to edit your podcast. Charlie, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that we spend you see so many podcasts now with a very close proximity microphone. And of course, just by definition, we want to hear what the subject is saying and the questions that are being asked and the conversation that's ensuing. And so we put a lot of effort and energy and resources into making sure we capture the dialogue. The dialogue is critical. And then in this particular scenario with events and conferences, and we want to then kind of almost add back in, because if you stand back out in the room and grab all of that sound and expect to also grab the dialogue, it's going to be it's not going to be as pleasant a listening experience. So we want to get in close and grab the dialogue, but we also want to have, in post productions, we want to have the ambience of the environment that we're in, and then slowly feather that back in. And that's where in immersive, you can actually have that dialogue in the front two speakers or in the center channel, and dialogue, I mean the interviews and whatnot, and then bring around you can bring that the dynamics and the environment back in so that your audience feels like they're standing on the conference floor with you. So
yeah, and in our future episodes, we will actually have podcasters doing this that we're going to bring on to speak about their applications in the field. I can understand and appreciate for many podcasters who may be working by themselves or just them and one partner. It can feel somewhat overwhelming. How do I apply immersive audio? We only have four hands between the two of us. And it just comes down to preparation and planning. If going into the event, you know what you want to have at the end of the in your show, you can be a little bit more prepared and planned to capture those sounds. So you don't necessarily need to be recording everything at the same time. Get your interview, do your setups with that, and then go pick up some B sound. So if you're at a restaurant, and maybe you're a restaurant podcast, and let's say you're at a restaurant for an event. We'll get into other types of lifestyle podcasts in a second, but get the interview and then just capture the ambient sound. It doesn't have to be happening at the same time. It can be happening at different times, as long as at the same event. Get that ambient sound, and then you can edit it together. And in terms of editing applications, I know we're talking about advanced techniques like Dolby Atmos. In future episodes, we'll get into simple plugins that you can use on your laptop if you are, again, a smaller operation of a podcast, or a podcast producer is just you or you and a couple people. How you can do this with very simple plugins and some simple audio software, and then move up to when you should start working with a professional sound mixer, professional sound designer, to take it to the next level. So going into the next type of podcast, interviews and conversations. So I had mentioned a restaurant earlier. There's some great bar podcasts out there. There's some great travel log podcasts out there. I love all of those. And some of them are doing a great job of capturing that ambient sound or taking you as the listener to that location. And that's what you want them to feel. You just don't want them to hear an interview or story. You want them to be there with you. So incorporating spatial audio into interviews and conversations can make them feel more dynamic and engaging. Placing participants in specific positions within the audio space can help listeners differentiate speakers and feel more immersed in the dialogue. Charlie, anything you want to add to interview or conversational style podcast?
Yeah, no. So we're working on a show right now that is an immersive audio piece for an audio drama, and it is the voices were all recorded in the studio, so they're really clean and great, and all the dialogue is right there. And I'll just use an example. There's a scene that's happening where two people are talking and they're walking through an airport. And in that particular scenario, we take those voices and we add just a little bit of spatial reverb to that, so that their voice doesn't sound quite so present. It sounds like you would experience. Now it's clean, it's clear, it's front and center, but at the same time, it adds a little bit of that flavor. And then we also add in backgrounds and effects, we add the sound of a terminal, and you can hear the paging Mr. So-and-so, or flight so-and-so is ready for boarding. All of those sound effects and pieces go in to the whole spatial piece, but the dialogue itself, we add a little reverb back in, just ever so slightly, a little bit of room tone back into it, so that it doesn't feel disjointed. It doesn't feel like, wow, that's like a really close mic. We want to back it up a little bit. And we call it proximity. We want the proximity of where that voice is to make sense. If you were standing there and another way to get a sense of what that might be is to actually go to in this case, go to a step into an airport with a friend and record them with the microphone back about 3 feet. And then listen to it back. And what does that sound like? You hear all these other sounds going on. You can certainly hear their voice, but there's a little sense of, there's a little sauce on their voice doesn't sound like they were recorded in a studio or something, in a booth. And try and duplicate that effect when you're mixing that. So that's where all of back to the subtleties again. It's the subtleties of putting you in that space.
Yeah. And as we come to the end of this first half of the presentation, before we get into Q&A, the one thing I always want to remind everybody is, and as Charlie touched on this, is keep it simple when you're stepping into this space. Don't feel overwhelmed. One thing I love about the Podcast Academy is how collaborative and supportive this community is. There's an amazing Slack channel. If you're playing around, hop on there and ask questions if you need to. In the future episodes we will have, you'll meet podcasters and other sound mixers, designers for some of the biggest podcast studios in the business, and other ones who have Ambie-nominated shows, and you have the opportunity to hear from them how they got into this space, how it's worked for them, and ask them questions too. But don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel scared. It's it's exciting space and one that is very welcoming for those who want to really give it a go. So that would be my little spiel on immersive audio and giving it a try for your podcast. Give it a chance, and I think you'll find you're going to have a great time telling amazing stories. With that, I think we're going to bring up questions, and let's see if I can do this. I might need Michelle to help me. I'm going to go to stop screen share. We have Q&A. Okay, so I see a few. Okay. We have a question from Sean. There are currently no podcast platforms that allow immersive audio for independent podcasts from podcasters to listen on the listener end. We have no access to Wondery or Audible. When will this happen? Why should I spend money and time on this in my indie if listeners can't hear my podcast in Atmos anyway? It's a great question, and I think Charlie can chime in on this too, but yes, Dolby Atmos files, the delivery of a full Dolby Atmos file as to a phone, in podcasting isn't there yet. I think technically there is the technology to do it, but it hasn't been embraced by the platforms. But that doesn't preclude the immersive audio experience. So Charlie, why don't you talk about some of the challenges you've had in mimicking the immersive audio experience that you would have in a full Dolby Atmos stage with 140 speakers in a binaural experience, and how you've been able to achieve that. And I think how a lot of other immersive audio dramas and other podcasters have been able to achieve that.
So it's a really good question, and so all three of these questions from Sean.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that currently Audible is on the cusp, from what I understand, of possibly accepting an 80 MB wave, which would be a full Dolby Atmos deliverable. Currently, none of them do yet. That said, we delivered a piece that we mixed in full Dolby Atmos and then did a binaural render of it. And that is what we delivered to Spotify. And we were able to get our audio drama with that spatial, with all of the spatial moves and whatnot. That is what we delivered to Spotify. And it comes, the binaural by definition is a bin dot wave. So it's a 2-channel wave, just like you would send in a regular 2-channel down mix of anything else you're doing.
Yeah.
So you can send it in, and it's a wave format, but it's been rendered in binaural, and that's what we delivered to Spotify, and they accepted it just fine. So to answer your question, currently, Audible is not accepting a full 80 MB wave, and I presume that will be forthcoming. But the next best thing is to deliver your podcast that you've mixed in Dolby Atmos and deliver the binaural version of it.
And Charlie, maybe help us also understand, in a podcast environment, if we're not sitting in a home theater with a lot of speakers, most people are going to use headphones. Some people are just going to use a sound bar or their home smart speaker. The challenges of experiencing sometimes a full native Dolby Atmos mix. But that doesn't preclude us as producers from wanting to create our content using Dolby Atmos, because it lets us to build what we believe the perfect audible world. But in getting the device, knowing that most listening devices are going to be headphones, cars, or home smart speakers, how do we translate that so that we have an immersive experience?
Yeah, so I don't know what the format will look like. For example, when Audible decides to deliver, to have a platform for us to upload a full 80 MB wave, a full Dolby Atmos mix, and then how many people will actually be able to listen to that in full Dolby Atmos is probably a little limited. So there's going to be some algorithmic adjustments happening within their platform so that the audience hears it, I don't know. So that would be a question for for the streamers. Now, that said, there is, by definition, and the binaural was designed with Dolby Atmos, within Dolby Atmos, was designed for the headphone. And so with a little bit of additional mastering, we happen to work on something that we called IAX, which is immersive audio experience, which is just a 2-channel mastering. And it's a 2-channel mastering that happens post binaural mix. And it elevates, and much like you would master a song in music, after a song is recorded and it's in its form just before it goes for final streaming, you send it to a mastering engineer. And so this is the same piece that we're doing for this, and it just gives it a little more oomph, so that it translates to speaker bars, to a computer, to your car. It adds a little more gravitas to the piece. But the 2-channel binaural is currently going to be your best bet for a deliverable to keep that what's the word I'm looking for, to keep the integrity of your mix for your audience. Now, that said, I would not step away from mixing in Dolby Atmos because currently Audible is not accepting Dolby Atmos, because right now we have another project in here that was shot in 4K, and it was released some years ago. And it's now being remastered in 4K because at the time, nobody was accepting 4K deliverables. They only wanted high def. So the movie was released in high def. It was released in 5.1, and it won a whole slew of awards, and they're doing a remaster of it, and they're remastering it in 4K and a Dolby Atmos mix that we're doing here. That said, if you mix today in Dolby Atmos and deliver in binaural, and 18 months from now, Dolby Atmos is an acceptable upload for some of the streamers, you don't have to go back and start over again. You just upload your Dolby Atmos version of it. So the ADMB wave version of it. So I think that there's certainly legs for the future if you mix today in Dolby Atmos, even though you can't deliver the full Dolby Atmos for these streamers. It's a long-winded response to your question, Sean, but I think there's an opportunity there for getting the best of all of these worlds.
Yeah, and Sean brings up a good question about, why should I invest? Why should I spend money? I think it comes down to the type of podcast you're producing. If you're an audio drama, which we're seeing quite an uptick in production, and I think it's going to be an exciting opportunity for narrative storytelling. If you can work out and get some level of a Dolby Atmos mix done on your audio drama, I'd highly recommend it. If you're doing more of a travelogue, conversational, interview style podcast, then using plugins that can create more spatial audio reverbs and just kind of the surrounds that you need to kind of place your audience there, that makes sense. So it comes down again to what is the content you're producing and what is your end goal with the content. With audio dramas, you're creating IP. That IP can go places, be it audiobooks, be it graphic novels, or heck, maybe even adapted to a television show. So you're gonna want to, if you can afford it, to invest in the highest production value because you're creating intellectual property. The others are, yes, forms of IP, but you may not have the resources, or it just may not make creative sense to invest in Dolby Atmos for a interview style show.
I think it might be interesting to if you'd like to hear what the binaural mix sounds like. There's a show called The Metal Detective, and it's 4 episodes. It's an immersive audio drama based on a television, based on a movie script, and but that was delivered in binaural to Spotify, Sean. So if you were to listen to that, you can get a sense with your headphones on. You can get a sense of an immersive mix that was rendered in binaural and delivered.
Yeah. There's another great one I saw that was promoted at the most recent podcast movement. I think it was called Hindsight. And I listened to a bunch of those, and they were great.
Really
So
good.
there's a lot of good ones. Yeah, really good. There's a lot of great ones out there. Again, it comes down, Sean, to what's best for your story, I guess, your business. But great questions. Let me see it. We have some others in here. Let me go to Q&A again. Scroll down. Sean's got the great questions today. So he's asking, are you sticking to 18 LUFS for your stereo binaural up to 14-ish? So now we're getting into some technical stuff, really, for episode 4, which are our
That's
advanced
kind of
applications.
down in the weeds. That's getting down in the weeds. But on the final mastering, the IAX
Yeah.
master, we actually mess with that a little bit, just because of the end game, the end result for deliverables is, we found that the 18 LUFS to be a little ambiguous. And so we erred on the side of, to answer your question, yes, we have to stay within deliverable parameters, but we also want to make sure that it sounds right. And so we adjust that. We'll get into this more in episode 4, but really, really good questions, because some of those deliverable specs are brought to us by the end streamers. So.
Yeah, so I should say webinar 4, which is happening in November. I know it's a little bit long to get to. So Sean, why don't you connect with us offline, and we can get into all the thick of this and answer questions sooner. But yeah, webinar number 4 we'll have some pretty experienced sound designers, mixers, and hopefully, Sean, you can join us for that one. Love your questions so far, and we hope you join us for the others too.